Forget the dramatic narratives of sudden stock market crashes. The real anatomy of economic collapse is a synchronized systemic failure of energy, tourism, and foreign exchange. Cuba is currently providing a brutal case study in structural disintegration, where a layered breakdown of core infrastructure has transformed a fragile economy into a non-functioning operating system. This is not merely a period of low growth, but the terminal interruption of the basic machinery required for modern life to persist. Financial markets often wait for the explosive thunder of a stock market crash to announce a national downfall, but the true markers of a dying economy are found in the creeping silence of a classroom or the hollow echoes of a terminal where flights no longer arrive. We are witnessing a transformation where a country is becoming a ghost of its own accounting ledgers. The numbers might suggest a state still exists, yet the visceral reality is one of disappearing tourists, long lines for a single gallon of fuel, and hospitals that have become islands of desperation. This is the anatomical reality of a system where the vital organs of daily existence simply stop beating. Cuba stands today as a stark laboratory for this specific brand of systemic decay. To view its current state as the result of one bad decision or a singular catastrophic moment is to miss the terrifying complexity of its situation. The island is being crushed under a synchronized collapse of its four fundamental pillars: tourism, foreign exchange, energy production, and overall economic growth. This is not a simple case of poverty. It is a layered breakdown. We must look past the superficial symptoms and ask the difficult question of why this engine continues to seize up despite decades of external assistance, constant adaptation, and desperate stabilization efforts. The data provided by Reuters in mid-March paints a grim picture of this multifaceted emergency. The reporting highlights an environment defined by severe oil shortages, a lack of essential medicine, and power outages that have become a standard feature of life. This was corroborated by the Associated Press in early March, when a massive blackout paralyzed the lives of millions across Havana and the western reaches of the island. These are not just anecdotes of hardship. They are the cracks in a foundation that was already brittle long before these specific shocks arrived. The fundamental cause traces back to a decaying thermoelectric plant and an electrical grid that has been gutted by aging infrastructure and a lack of fuel. If an economy is a complex organism, then electricity is the nervous system that carries every single command. A nation can actually endure the slow rot of stagnant wages or the suffocating weight of a bloated bureaucracy for a surprisingly long time. It can even survive isolation. However, the moment fuel and electricity evaporate simultaneously, the crisis enters a terminal phase. An economy can withstand the friction of hardship, but it cannot survive the total loss of its internal heartbeat. When the lights go out, the damage is not confined to the darkness. It ripples through every sector like a viral infection. A blackout is an interruption that breeds 1,000 other interruptions. Transport networks grind to a halt, and the productivity of factories vanishes. Food security is compromised as refrigeration fails, and the commercial sector loses its ability to function. The Associated Press has already noted that this energy instability has forced universities to suspend classes and has pushed healthcare facilities to the brink. For the average citizen, the most devastating loss is the death of predictability. Without a stable grid, coordination across the entire economy dissolves, leading to a massive loss of output and a total evaporation of public confidence. This friction has moved beyond the desks of government planners and is now the primary force dictating the rhythm of every ordinary life. In the systems that make normal life possible, the machinery of the state has fundamentally shifted from a mere collection of fiscal hurdles into a rigid structural cage. This transformation in Cuba is not driven solely by the absence of oil, but by the devastating collision of petroleum deficits with a power grid that has lost all capacity for resilience. While the administration has scrambled to stabilize the foundation using a fragmented mix of domestic crude, thermoelectric power, natural gas, and nascent solar projects, these efforts resemble applying a thin bandage to a deep arterial wound. Because the nation is merely mending old fractures rather than forging a new skeleton, any singular tremor in the energy supply no longer stays isolated. Instead, the failure hemorrhages across every sector, turning a localized shortage into a total systemic paralysis. At the heart of this struggle lies the tourism sector, an industry that functions as the primary oxygen tank for the island. Far from being a luxury side business, tourism represents the lifeblood of Cuba's hard currency reserves. According to data provided by Reuters, this sector generated roughly $1.3 billion in revenue throughout 2024, which translates to a staggering 10% of the total export earnings for the country. In a landscape where external financing is virtually non-existent, these greenbacks are the only tool available to settle the bills for essential imports, sustain public services, and mitigate the crushing pressure on the balance of payments. However, the energy crisis has now begun to strangle the very industry meant to save it. We are witnessing a predatory feedback loop where the lack of power actively destroys the capacity to earn wealth. In February, Reuters highlighted a disturbing trend. As the island went public with its dwindling jet fuel reserves, major carriers like WestJet, Air Canada, and various Russian flight operators simply pulled the plug on their routes. This domino effect extended into the hospitality sector, where giants such as Melia and NH were forced to shutter their doors or merge their workflows just to survive the blackout. It is a textbook case of a self-perpetuating death spiral. Without fuel, there is no transport. Without transport, the visitors vanish. Without visitors, the foreign exchange disappears. And without that cash, the state is powerless to buy the fuel needed to restart the cycle. This vulnerability is a direct result of a historical reliance on external tethers that the country cannot influence. For decades, the Cuban economy was an extension of the Soviet Union's orbit, and later, it leaned heavily on the subsidized energy and ideological partnership provided by Venezuela. Even the modern reliance on remittances, service exports, and tourism follows the same precarious blueprint of building a house on shifting sands. The profound geoeconomic reality here is that the crisis stems from more than just the weight of international sanctions or the friction of internal red tape. It is the consequence of an entire national architecture designed around external lifelines that can be severed at any moment by forces far beyond Havana's reach. This is the ultimate lesson of a country that fails to own its own economic heartbeat. It is not simply that it lacks reform. It is that the economy has repeatedly been organized around outside flows that can weaken, shrink, or disappear. The moment a national architecture loses its elasticity, it ceases to bend under the weight of financial stress and begins to splinter like dry timber. This is the precise threshold where a standard fiscal downturn mutates into a terminal structural failure. In the case of Cuba, the economy is currently being squeezed by a quartet of simultaneous pressures: a decaying energy sector, a vanishing tourism industry, a drought of foreign exchange, and the crumbling of essential public services. According to the World Bank, Cuba posted negative GDP growth in 2024, a statistic that confirms the country entered this era of intensified energy blackouts with absolutely zero fiscal padding. While a robust economy acts like a shock absorber, a fragile one behaves like an amplifier, taking every external tremor and magnifying it until the entire system resonates with instability. The result is a society where the fundamental rhythm of existence is no longer defined by economic output, but by the frequency of systemic interruptions. One does not find the evidence of this decay in the sudden explosion of a stock market ticker, but in the steady evaporation of reliability. This is an erosion of the bedrock of daily life rather than a single seismic event. We see it in the widespread failure of the electrical grid and the paralysis of the transportation networks. We see it as international airlines retreat from the island, and as shelves for food and medicine grow barren. These recurring blackouts are far more than mere engineering glitches. They are economic distress flares. They signal to the world that the import mechanisms are failing and the state has lost the ability to maintain the continuity of modern life. When a nation starts losing its grip on transport, education, and healthcare simultaneously, the crisis has successfully migrated out of the planning ministries and into the marrow of the social structure. The political fallout from this mechanical failure has been swift and visible. Reuters has highlighted the mounting heat on President Miguel Díaz-Canel, while the Associated Press documented significant civil unrest in Morin. In that city, the friction of constant outages and shortages boiled over into protests, resulting in arrests and physical damage to a local Communist Party office. It is a fundamental truth of political economy that citizens rarely take to the streets because of a slight dip in a balance sheet or a fractional change in a national account. They revolt when the machinery of their daily lives simply stops turning. This unrest is the surface-level symptom of a deep-seated systems failure. The state's primary mandate is the reproduction of normality, yet the Cuban model has become incapable of delivering even a basic version of ordinary life. This disintegration serves as a critical case study because it highlights the lethal combination of a four-way dependency trap. Cuba is struggling under the weight of an unstable power grid, a total reliance on fragile energy imports, a volatile stream of hard currency inflows, and a foundation of stagnant growth. When these elements fail in unison, the economy does not experience a textbook collapse like a bank run or a sovereign default. Instead, it suffers a slow-motion hollowing out. The buses stop arriving, the shops stay empty, and the financing for imports dries up. A country does not need a spectacular explosion to fail. It only needs to become so unpredictable that the ground beneath the feet of its citizens feels permanently unreliable. The broader geoeconomic implication is that when a nation's essential functions are tethered exclusively to external flows, any disruption at the port or the fuel depot travels instantly into the kitchen, the classroom, and the clinic. Cuba's persistent breakdown is not the result of a single flaw, but a web of linked catastrophes. It is an energy network starving for fuel, a grid too brittle for stress, and a tourism sector losing the confidence of global carriers. While a nation might survive the cold reality of poverty or the silence of isolation for a time, it cannot survive the simultaneous exhaustion of foreign exchange, fuel, and electricity. This is no longer a temporary setback or a seasonal dip. It is a permanent structural shift in a system that is breaking because its vital supports were never secured to the ground in the first place.